Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drum McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at thechangeleader.com. Changing Higher Ed is sponsored by Blackbaud, the world's leading cloud software company powering social good. With their cloud solution for higher education, Blackbaud connects thousands of campuses worldwide. Visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn how they can help your institution deliver a better experience. And now, here's your host, Drum McNaughton.
Thanks, David. Our guests this week are Tim Hill, President of Blackbaud's Higher Education Solutions Group, and Scott Roberts, President of UConn's Foundation. Tim has a long and strong career in business. He served as an executive at a number of high-profile companies such as iOmega, Software AG, and Blackbaud. Scott has over 20 years' experience in fundraising, including his last gig, which was at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where in his last year there, raised over $93 million for its foundation, a record. Tim, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Drum.
Oh, it's our pleasure to do this. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and Julia has just done a fabulous job and helping me put all this stuff together. Really looking forward to talk to you about fundraising. And fundraising right now, especially with the COVID crisis, is more important now than it's ever been. There's a lot of challenges going on there. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those challenges and how the environment has changed?
Sure. Yeah, we have some few different layers of challenges, and they range from internal to external. And as I think about our immediate internal challenges, obviously our budgetary concerns are pretty significant with the downturn of the economy, and most foundations are funded through a few different streams of revenue, one of those being investment earnings. And so that's how we pay for our staff. That's how we pay for events. In addition, we have a lot of anxiety among our staff. What's going to happen? There's uncertainty about their roles. If they're in event management and we're not doing events, what does that mean for them? How do they pivot and perhaps use virtual events instead of in-person events? We also have challenges with our frontline fundraisers in how they achieve their metrics and goals. For example, if they can't meet with people, how are they able to raise money? And so even at the UConn Foundation, we've actually changed the way back of house we track our constituent engagement activities. So we used to have just emails, face-to-face meetings, phone calls. We've actually added virtual meetings to our set of ways that we count and acknowledge our efforts of our staff. And then that carries on to our constituents, our alumni, our friends, our donors. How do we continue to be optimistic and enthusiastic about the work of a great institution, but also be compassionate and empathetic to what they may be going through in their life, whether it's their own personal careers that have been affected or a loved one? Those are things that we're constantly thinking about. It's always on our minds. And so there's certainly no shortage of challenges at this time.
I can well imagine. How are you dealing with some of these challenges? Let's take the internal, for example, and people insecurities about jobs. You've already talked about transitioning the way work is done. What are some of the other things you're doing?
Well, certainly the trend is to begin holding more virtual events. So whether it's a panel discussion among our leaders at the institution, we've also done quite a bit with UConn Health, having our CEO of that organization talk about health-related initiatives, ways that people can remain safe during this time. We're also planning on doing a lot of events around our coaches. And people still want to hear what's going on in athletics. And so the coaches want to tell those stories and talk about the recruits. And so we're setting up panel meetings, virtual meetings with our coaches for our top constituents to learn about and hear what's going on.
It sounds like there's a lot of technology involved. And Tim, that's right up your alley. What are some of the things that technology you're seeing out there that's helped folks during the pandemic?
Yeah, so Drum, I'll first start out by saying, Yeah, we're a technology provider, a software provider to advancement, alumni development, and other higher ed departments across the campus. So our main concern during a crisis like COVID is our customers and their constituents. So we consider ourselves practitioners as well in all things advancement because it's our job to give them counsel, help, etc. On the tech side, it's our job to ensure that our platforms are highly scalable, have a high level of uptime, have feature functionality that really enable them. And during this period, as a member of CASE, the Council for Advancement and Supportive Education, which is the preeminent member association for higher education advancement departments, it's key to make sure that our customers and the market get the resources in front of them, in front of their executive team, like Scott and his staff, in front of major gift officers, in front of those responsible for advancement services, as well as the technology that runs the advancement department, or in Scott's case at UConn, the entire foundation. So we always look at what best practices can we help them with? What technologies do we have, or do our technology partners in our partner ecosystem have, that help them stay in closer touch with their constituents, help them use intelligent analytics to segment their market, and then help them bring other resources in, whether it's consulting from some of our partners and industry experts like GG&A, Littman Hearn, Campbell and Company, and others, as well as CASE, to give them the tools they need during a crisis like this to continue to fundraise, and most importantly, to continue to stay in touch with their constituents as well as their students.
Oh, thank you. And that's, the technology is so critical in this period of time. We were talking a little bit before we came on air about how you're shifting, Scott, the focus and, accessing your databases to ensure that you're on message. What is some of the data that you carry there, and how is that used so that you make sure that you're able to stay on message, an appropriate message?
Well, in our industry, there's so many similarities between the foundations and universities and how they outreach to our constituents. And so there's certainly a lot of best practices out there. We found that there's a heavy emphasis on social media right now. So we try to tell our stories through those platforms, in addition to emails and other types of communication. But the need to hear that their alma mater is making a difference, and what we're doing for our constituents, including our students and faculty and staff and alumni and the state of Connecticut, is an important message to get out there. And so we work really hard to try to get as much information about that as possible. And I think the constant communication is really important, that this is not a time to be quiet. This is the time to really connect even more with our constituents than we ever have before, and we're putting a lot of emphasis on that.
And we talked a little bit before we came on, is how many of your meetings are shifting to online. How's that working out for you guys?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I found internally with our staff, just communicating on a regular basis. We're doing things like hosting virtual happy hours with our staff in the evenings, just to have some face time with one another and connect and tell stories. And so from time to time, the last one I had the university president jumped on kind of as a special guest and just toasted everyone and thanked them for all their hard work during this time. There's a lot of ways that we can utilize technology to still feel connected during this time, all the way to our alumni and donors. I've actually gone on a virtual walk with one of our major supporters, and it was actually pretty fun. And so those are things that we can do that are unique, that still make people feel connected.
Oh, that's great. And Tim, from your perspective, how is this working?
So, we've been using in our industry, meaning our customers as well as technology vendors like Blackbaud, we've been using virtual meeting technologies for a number of years, because missing the human touch, sometimes you miss those key connections that can turn a prospect into a customer. In the case of advancement, can turn a sometimes donor into a significant donor. So, the personal touch and that human connection is critical during a time like this. And what we found working in the industry and with our customers as well as internal to our company, that people are actually more hungry now for that interaction than they've ever been. So because we've lost that human touch in our daily lives and our work lives and our neighborhoods, etc., it's important that we reach out to people where they're at in their daily life and make that connection. So whether it's your staff and your team, or it's a constituent, or it's somebody else, in the case of UConn, on your campus, somebody you work with, it's critical to stay in touch virtually, not just an email or an IM or a text, but get them on the camera, get them on the phone, and that person to person touch just makes a huge difference in connecting with people. What I've seen with advancement professionals as far as best practices through tons of articles on every kind of social and digital media outlet is when major gift officers contact a current donor or a prospect and start out by asking them how they're doing, what's happening in your life during this crisis, before they get into any messaging around what's happening with the university, what's happening with fundraising, etc. It makes that one-to-one connection that means a lot to the donor. They want to feel like the gift officer on the other end of the phone or on the other end of a WebEx or a Zoom or a GoToMeeting cares about them and where they're at. And that can make all the difference in kind of breaking down those barriers that sometimes exist when you just send an email or a mailer.
I get it completely. A friend of mine a long time ago said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And this is that very thing.
That's excellent.
Some of the foci have changed, though, with what you're looking at from a fundraising perspective. But before we get into that, I've heard both of you mention social media a couple of times. Scott, how are you guys doing that from the UConn Foundation perspective?
We have a lot of research going through our contacts on Facebook and Instagram and how people are want to be communicated to, and tracking what type of stories they're interested in and trying to use that to have the best outcome. And so I think part of it is just making sure that we're staying in front of them. There's certainly a lot of wonderful stories to share and things that they're specifically interested in at this time. So we're trying to maximize that and get the stories out there, utilizing not just our own resources, but the universities as well in the storytelling aspect.
That's great. And Tim, what have you been seeing along these lines?
So just by way of background, Scott, when he was president of the UNLV Foundation in Las Vegas, he was on our executive advisory board. And then when he moved to the UConn Foundation as president, one of his senior execs, Jennifer Sargent, joined our executive advisory board. Jennifer is the assistant vice president for advancement at UConn. And Scott and I have always had a friendly battle on LinkedIn on who can post the most pertinent content, get the most views, etc. And the reason we get a kick out of that is because, by and large, advancement and development and alumni professionals consume a lot of their business content on LinkedIn. That seems to be the go-to channel for digestible content on best practices, etc. But at the same time, I have seen Scott's posts on LinkedIn about UConn Foundation, and everything the university does that impacts not just their community, their state, but the entire country. And those kind of stories are what have impact on people. So, we obviously share on all digital channels, from as a technology provider, from LinkedIn to Facebook to Twitter, as well as other digital mediums, Instagram and others. But when it comes to advancement professionals reaching their constituents, their alumni, I think all the channels are equally important, because people are hungry for stories about how their alma mater is making a difference, either during the crisis, actually making a difference during the crisis in their community, but also their long-term strategy, how they really impact our society going forward. Whether you're a research university, a land-grant university, our institutions do so much for our society worldwide. And in North America, the impact has never been clearer than ever during the COVID crisis.
I'm curious, though, for either one of you, is there a particular platform you use to distribute your social media, or do you have someone who does that manually?
Our global marketing team uses multiple platforms that I won't get into our tech stack since we're a public company and it kind of exposes how we operate, but multiple technologies that help you broadcast content through omni-channels, meaning one post that helps you broadcast across multiple channels with similar messaging and creative. So it could be a campaign about our scholarship and award management platform, which is very popular right now because there's a student-centric challenge to the COVID crisis, and students need scholarships more than ever. Or it could be thought leadership around best practices in advancement and reaching constituents, or analytics to target. So we're across all those channels consistently, and we have a tech stack that we've invested in that helps us not only get the digestible content out there, video, audio, infographics, stories, and more, but actually allows us to measure engagement, whether it's through those channels or it bounces people back to blackbaud.com, our global website. And that's what's critical, because great content is only as good as how many times it's digested and by whom. And I know that's important to institutions like UConn as they spread their digital content as well.
That makes perfect sense. Scott?
We also use multiple channels to get information out. We have a communications and marketing team at the foundation, but we also partner very closely with the university's communication team. And so we try not to be redundant in our efforts. There's oftentimes stories that we may want to get out that the university will push out through their platform and vice versa. And so it's a really great partnership with UConn in trying to get those stories out there that will be inspirational to our constituents.
Thank you. So in looking at the various foci that you gentlemen have right now, there's been a shift because of the pandemic and the so many people being laid off. It's moving more toward raising funds for scholarships. Does that change the techniques that you use? How has that changed other than the different foci?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I would even go so far to say what I've seen and what we're focused on right now are two very specific funds. One is to help with the relief efforts of COVID-19. So whether it's to support University of Connecticut Health or our medical school, or research that's occurring to try to help solve this global issue. The second is less about scholarships and more about student emergency funds. We found several students who are really challenged in paying bills. Either they aren't employed any longer, or they've come across some financial distress. Perhaps a family member is sick and that student can't afford to get back and be with that family member, or whatever the case may be. And so the Student Emergency Fund has been a really critical area of need, and that I think people can really resonate with, because we were all there at some point in our lives where we're not sure what we're going to do or how we're going to pay for something. And so the university has made that a priority, and we've been working really hard to get that message out to our constituents.
That's great. Tim, from your perspective?
I think right now there's a pressing need across multiple fronts for any university of any size, from small faith-based institutions to medium-sized liberal arts schools, community colleges, all the way up to our major universities like University of Connecticut. And it spans the staff, administration, as well as the students. And I've really been impressed by the outreach and the actions that most universities have taken around supporting their students. Our research with our executive advisory board and other constituents who are our customers show that a lot of student emergency funds have been the focus of fundraisers, and they've gotten a lot of alumni and other constituents to give to that. Because when you think about it, school is closed, and you have students that had to leave campus. Some might not have been in the financial situation to leave the campus and go back to their home state. Others might be from kind of a difficult situation at their home. There's many ways to help students from all demographic and financial backgrounds, and that's where universities and these funds really step in. There's also a lot of uncertainty around what's going to happen as they finish out the school year, most of it being virtually with online instruction. And they look forward towards fall, whether they're a returning student, a transfer student, or even a rising freshman that's enrolling in an institution. So the financial need for these students is probably greater than it's ever been. And scholarships are a wonderful way for donors to give, because it not only impacts the institution, but it directly impacts a student where they can really make a difference in that student's life. So we've been really pleased and excited by what the universities in the U.S. have done with those student emergency funds, but also how they've continued to focus on growing their scholarship funding.
Makes perfect sense. And Scott, I'm just kind of questioning, because when you're doing fundraising, funds will come in either restricted or unrestricted. Are you looking more toward unrestricted funds at this point, or does it really matter? Just depends on where the funds should be targeted.
Yeah, generally speaking, I would say as much as 95% of all of our gifts are restricted for some purpose. And I think as long as it's restricted to a purpose that is a desperate need of the university, that's completely fine. And I think most people want to make sure that their dollars go to support an area that they're passionate about. And so if it's going into a student emergency fund, that still allows the university enough flexibility to determine which student needs it for what purpose, and they can still have that flexibility, but it's still supporting students like the donor would want.
And it makes good sense for you guys to have such very close coordination with the university itself, so that you can make sure that you're raising the funds in the areas that the university needs.
That's right. I never feel like a foundation's job is to determine the priorities for a university. Our job is to listen to the university, what their priorities are, and then implement all of our efforts to make sure that we're able to help the university in whatever their priorities are.
And Tim, how has your support of your clients changed during this period of time?
In some ways, it hasn't changed, in that we have a tremendous investment in our infrastructure. We have a mix of cloud software coupled with some larger institutions that have on-premise software for their constituent management or CRM, and others are hosted in our hosting center. So our focus has been around security of our systems. We invest heavily in security, since we not only help them raise money, we actually transact those transactions, but also the uptime of our multiple products. We have like 25 different solutions we sell into higher ed to help advancement departments. So that has continued to be a focus, and we've managed that virtually because of our cloud infrastructure as a public company. But also, we've tried to do a better job of providing our customers with best practices, thought leadership around what they have to do on a daily basis. And we haven't done this by ourselves. We're a platinum sponsor for CASE, which is, again, the preeminent association for all things advancement and alumni. We've also worked with some of those partners who are thought leaders around those major campaigns, which we as alumni always get mailings, emails, phone calls, etc. And so firms like GG&A, Littman Hearn, Campbell and Company, Oology, as well as others. So there's tons of resources out there, and what we focused on is how do we get those out there to our customers in a digestible way, in partnership with these other orgs. And I hope it's made a difference.
I'm sure it has. In talking with some of your clients previously, they sing your guys' praises, and that's always good to know. So we're coming up to the end of our time. Two questions, one for each of you gentlemen. Same question, starting with Scott. 3 takeaways that you would say to university presidents, to foundation CEOs, and other folks in your profession, things they need to be thinking about during these times?
Well, I think first and foremost, be sensitive and empathetic about, what people are going through. Don't make assumptions. So just, go into it with an open eye that there's some challenges out there. There's another area that Tim and I are in agreement with, and that's to be optimistic and positive. And so be encouraging and be inspirational in telling your story about what's going on with your institution or organization. And then don't be afraid to offer an opportunity for people to help. A lot of people out there want to help right now. And there's some of us out there that's our job, is to present those opportunities. And I don't think we should ever be ashamed to offer a way for people to make a difference or have an impact on student lives or an institution that it's doing great work. And so I think there's a way to do that in the right way, in the right tone. But I don't think we should step back and step away from that.
Oh, great. Thank you. And Tim, same question.
Yeah, so I think as an alumni of a university and being involved in higher education technology most of my career, we all have an affinity and a love for our alma mater. We also all have favorite teams, even if it wasn't at the university we went to. We might have gone to a smaller liberal arts school like I did, for example. So I always say the reason people attended and loved the time at your institution was because of your mission. Universities change lives. They impact communities. So first and foremost, stay focused on your mission. Give your constituents a reminder of that mission and the impact, because that's why they give to you in the first place. Whether they send their children there to attend your university or they give money to the university as an alumni or a local constituent. Second, and now more than ever, people are hungry for communications. They're hungry for content. When you reach out to somebody, like Scott said, have that empathy. Ask them questions about what's going on in their life before you start explaining what the institutions is doing and how they might be able to help. And then third, take time to take care of yourself and your team. That is just so critical. Ask people how they're doing on your team, right? How they're doing personally. Many folks are working from home for the first time in a long time, or maybe first time ever. They have young children who are now out of school. There's a lot of challenges that make it difficult or more stressful to work from home. And I think if you kind of focus on those 3 things, stay focused on your mission, communicate with empathy, and take care of yourself and your family, we'll all weather through this crisis and come out stronger on the other side and get higher education back to work.
Tim, Scott, thank you both so much. One last question for you gentlemen. When do you think we're going to be back to normal in higher ed?
I don't think anybody knows that answer, to be honest with you. But it seems like there's movement to begin heading in that direction. I think organizations are beginning to plan for what that might look like. And I know we're beginning to put together a plan for getting people back into the office. And what does that mean? What does social distancing mean within an office complex or office space? So I think there's still a lot of planning to be done there. And I don't know if anybody has an exact date. If you did, I want that crystal ball. But, there's a lot of work to be done still.
Very good. And Tim?
So I'm a big news hound, more so in my field of expertise around higher ed technology, but also in news in general. I'm very much optimistic that with the new normal, with the CDC guidelines, a lot of the steps that major universities and other universities are taking in how they will welcome students back, how they will instruct, how they will follow those social distancing and other CDC guidelines. I'm really optimistic that we, in most of the country at least, we can welcome students back to school this fall, even though there'll be some nuances or some changes. So I don't have a crystal ball either. I don't know an exact date, but as a higher education practitioner, I am focused on fall enrollment. And if we can make that, I'll be a happy guy.
You and about 1,500 or 1,000 other university presidents out there. Gentlemen, I want to thank you again for being on the show. I greatly appreciate your taking time out of your schedules, and stay safe and be healthy.
Thank you, Drum.
Thank you, Drum.
Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to this week's special guests, Tim Hill from Blackbaud and Scott Roberts from the UConn Foundation, who shared with us their thoughts on fundraising during the coronavirus crisis. I also want to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Blackbaud. Visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn about their cloud fundraising, accounting, education management, scholarship, and analytics solutions that are powering some of higher ed's top institutions. Our next guest is Julie Lenzer, Chief Innovation Officer for the University of Maryland. Julie's had a wonderful career serving in the private, public, and higher ed sectors, and she'll be talking with us about how this time is critical in higher ed's innovation cycle and what institution presidents can be doing to leverage this crisis to innovate.
This episode of Changing Higher Ed was brought to you by Blackbaud, the world's leading cloud software company powering social good. Be sure to visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn how they can help your institution deliver a better experience from admissions to advancement. Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drum McNaughton, post-production by David L. White. This episode of Changing Higher Ed was brought to you by Blackbaud, the world's leading cloud software company powering social good. Be sure to visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn how they can help your institution deliver a better experience from admissions to advancement. Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drum McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.